Thank you for joining us for the 2021 Leaders in Diversity event. My name is Jay Tarakia, and I am the market president for Truist Bank in Baltimore. We are proud to be the premier sponsor of this event now for the 5th year in a row. And every year we are inspired by the honorees of this event, people who challenge us to think critically about what are we doing to make a difference. And it was last year's honorees that left us with a thought-provoking question. Outside of giving money, outside of corporate philanthropy, what tangible, measurable, and actionable steps are we taking to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? So we were inspired by these honorees and the question that they asked us, and I am proud to report back on 3 things that Truist is doing in hopes that it may get others thinking too about what they can do to make a tangible impact. First, we went out and spoke with HBCU presidents across the country. Locally, that meant Coppin, Morgan, Howard. We listened to what they were focused on: increasing graduation rates, career awareness and preparedness, business expertise as a part of the curriculum. And so, yes, we provide internships and scholarships, but we also now do leadership training for these young folks. We take an active role in mapping out their career pathways. We show up on campus to discuss the business climate and how to succeed in the workplace. And by the way, our HBCUs have some of the most talented students in the country. So it is not only the right thing to do, it is absolutely the smart thing to do. Secondly, we have to acknowledge that issues like access to capital, money circulation, generational creation and transfer of wealth are unequivocally harder in marginalized communities. So we have invested in and partnered with companies like Greenwood, an innovative digital banking platform for Black and Latinx consumer and business owners to address needs that are unique to them. And finally, we know that in diverse communities, walking into a bank branch with people that look like you, speak the same language that you do, and have shared experiences makes a big difference in creating trust. So across the Truist footprint, we now have 800 multicultural branches, strategically placed in minority neighborhoods to be a reflection of the community that they serve. And this is just the very beginning. Every year we look at the Leaders of Diversity honorees to help guide us on how to get better, to continue to challenge us and elevate our thinking. And someone who helps us do this internally at Truist is my good friend and partner, Trisha Haley, our Enterprise Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader. Trisha, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jay. Let's start with sharing our Truist purpose. It is to inspire and build better lives in communities. Every day, the pursuit of better drives us. We're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and boldly believe in the power of what we can achieve together. We're creating an inclusive and energizing environment where all teammates can be empowered to learn, grow, and have meaningful careers. We have 8 business resource groups in each of our 24 markets to increase cultural awareness, deliver our purpose, and foster inclusivity. The groups are Black Organizers, Leaders, and Doers, Asian Americans Collaborating, Veterans and Military Families, LGBTQIA, Generations Engagement Network, Women's Information Network, Capabilities Action Network, and Hispanics Organizing Purpose and Engagement. We have facilitated hundreds of Day of Understanding sessions to encourage bold and courageous conversations on topics like race and social justice. I have personally facilitated 206 sessions since June of 2020. Again, we are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and together we can do so many powerful and impactful things. Your attendance today shows your support, and we thank you. Let's get ready to hear from the amazing panelists and celebrate the honorees who are paving the way for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Thank you again for joining. Enjoy the program.
Next honoree is actually a duo, both of whom are working every day to advocate for health equity in the disability community, which has been disproportionately affected by COVID. These two Kennedy Krieger Institute executives have sought to mitigate vaccination obstacles for people with disabilities, including by lobbying the state to prioritize this group in the vaccine rollout and helping to increase access to and confidence in vaccines. Let's welcome Dr. Harolyn Belcher, whose many titles include Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and Maureen Van Stone, Director of Kennedy Krieger's Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities and Project HEAL.
Hello, I'm Dr. Harolyn Belcher. I'm the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Kennedy Krieger Institute. And I would like to thank my colleagues at Kennedy Krieger Institute and the Baltimore Business Journal for this award celebrating diversity efforts in Baltimore. It has been my deep honor and privilege to work on behalf of the children and families, our patients at Kennedy Krieger Institute. I truly love the work with our patients and to be able to teach and mentor the next generation of leaders who will be poised to eliminate health disparities and promote health and well-being for all people in Baltimore City and beyond. So I'd like to close by just again saying thank you, especially to my family who support my work, my husband, my adult children. Thank you so much.
It is my honor to accept the Baltimore Business Journal's Leaders in Diversity Award for 2021, along with the other distinguished honorees. I spent the majority of the pandemic working to ensure the voice of the disability community was heard when considering inclusive and equitable access to healthcare and the COVID-19 vaccine. I am grateful for the support of Kennedy Krieger's leadership team, my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, my collaborators at the Center for Dignity and Healthcare for People with Disabilities, all of my staff, and of course my daughters. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this virtual event and hear from the outstanding panelists.
This next honoree has been heavily involved in organizing Baltimore Tracks, a coalition of about 30 local tech companies that have committed to addressing long-standing racial inequities in tech and are taking steps to increase industry opportunities for minority workers. Among the coalition's initiatives is a new internship program that will place Baltimore City high school students with tech companies for paid internships. The man who spearheaded that effort is Michael Castagnola, Chief of Staff of SmartLogic. Please join us in honoring Michael and his efforts.
My name is Michael Castagnola. I'm honored to receive this award, and I'm proud of my company, SmartLogic, and all my team members that know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just an initiative to be executed upon, but is a fundamental way of being. I'm also thankful for my colleagues in the Baltimore Tracks Coalition, making our companies more equitable, improving workforce development pipelines, and advocating for public policies that will strengthen our city and region. I'm proud of all my colleagues who are fighting to make a difference, and I appreciate the recognition for our work. Thank you.
This winner has been prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion since she took the helm of the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group in Baltimore just 6 months before the COVID-19 pandemic began. Today, she has a team where 39 of the 53 leaders are people of color. Since the start of the vaccine campaign, she has been working to boost vaccine confidence in minority communities, be it by going on Facebook Live events, doing local media interviews, or leading direct outreach. The BBJ is proud to recognize Dr. Tinisha Cheatham, Physician-in-Chief of Kaiser Permanente in Baltimore and the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group.
Good afternoon. I am honored to be recognized as one of Baltimore Business Journal's 2021 Leaders in Diversity. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my family for always supporting me throughout my career. But I'd like to thank the Baltimore physicians of the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group who inspire me every day with their dedication for providing excellent and equitable care to our 136,000 patients in the greater Baltimore area. To my amazing leadership team who went above and beyond these last 15 months, we couldn't have done all the innovative things that we did without you. And lastly, thank you to the Baltimore Business Journal for this award. I am truly humbled and grateful. Thank you.
This honoree says diversity and inclusion are a major part of the formula when it comes to hiring and retention. Since he acquired Stella May Contracting Co., he has led the creation of over 125 new jobs, and 45% of Stella May's 11-person executive team members are either women or people of color. The CEO's approach to diversifying the company is to better know its community. Please join me in honoring Harley Flack, CEO of Stella May Contracting Co.
During this pivotal time in the history of our country and our city, I am humbled to be recognized by the Baltimore Business Journal for my work in diversity and inclusion. This truly is an award I share with my entire company, along with my best-in-class executive team, now comprised of 45% diverse individuals. At Stella May, I am excited that we have created over 125 jobs in the span of 4 years, and we are poised to surpass 200 employees by July of 2021. 89% of the company's employees reside in Maryland and 20% in Baltimore City. I'd like to thank the Baltimore Business Journal and congratulations to my fellow award winners.
Our next honoree knows firsthand what it's like to battle COVID-19. He has suffered its effects for months, but it hasn't stopped him from helping others. The pandemic spurred this CEO to expand Baltimore Corps' original mission to help those affected by the resulting economic crisis. The offshoot Baltimore Health Corps led recruitment and hiring for a $12 million initiative to create full-time public health employment for more than 300 Baltimore residents who had lost their jobs due to COVID. The BBJ is proud to recognize Fagan Harris, CEO of Baltimore Corps. This awardee has kept social impact top of mind while leading one of Mount Vernon's highest-profile hospitality institutions. Hotel Revival is known for its events and community outreach efforts, thanks in no small part to the work of its general manager. Under his leadership, the hotel launched a social impact plan, partnered with more minority-owned businesses, and hired the hotel's first director of culture and impact. We're happy to be honoring Dante Johnson, general manager of the Hotel Revival.
Hello. On behalf of Revival, the Hyatt family, and the entire extended community, I would like to thank Baltimore Business Journal for this amazing award. As we head into really uncertain times, Revival will continue to seek out ways to support small businesses and all disenfranchised communities within this city. We invite you to join us in that effort and wish everyone a great day.
Our next honoree has been a force for change in an industry long dominated by white men. He recently left Miles and Stockbridge PC to become a partner at Nelson Mullins Riley, but during his 5+ years as a principal at Miles and Stockbridge, he played a leading role in the law firm's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. He was instrumental in the launch of the LGBTQ+ Alliance at Miles and Stockbridge in 2019 and oversaw the hiring of a DEI consultant who is conducting mandatory implicit bias training for all employees. We're proud to recognize Craig Long and his work at Miles and Stockbridge.
Eva Amonde Gonzalez, and I serve as Chief Officer for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Professional Development at Miles and Stockbridge. On behalf of Craig Long and Miles and Stockbridge, I would like to thank the Baltimore Business Journal for the Leaders in Diversity Award and congratulate our fellow honorees. I also want to thank Miles and Stockbridge and Craig Long for their support of all the DE&I educational programming and initiatives we have presented firm-wide during the past 2 years since I joined the firm. We look forward and are committed to the work ahead. Thank you again for this honor.
This honoree has made his equity and inclusion mark on a premier architecture firm with offices in Baltimore City. As the local office head for global architecture and design firm Gensler, Vaki Mwema has helped to ensure community voices are included on major projects like the planned redevelopment of Penn Station, and has worked on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts internally as a member of Gensler's Global Race and Diversity Committee. We're happy to be honoring Vaki Mwema, Managing Director and Principal of Gensler's Baltimore office.
Thank you, Baltimore Business Journal, and thank you to all of my friends and my colleagues at Gensler for this incredible recognition and award.
Our next honoree is a blind civil rights lawyer who has faced issues of discrimination in both his personal and professional life. As chair of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, he has led a 3-year strategic plan to diversify the board's membership to be more inclusive of women and those with disabilities. He has been involved in many other roles, including serving on the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Please help me recognize Gary Norman, chair of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights.
I express my gratitude to the Baltimore Business Journal for this recognition, as well as the associated convening process. Let me first thank my wonderful wife, Laura, who is like my Abigail Adams. Next, let me thank my present as well as past guide dogs. They have been my true friends and counselors in this life. Third, let me thank some fraternity brothers and friends who have been true role models to me in this leadership journey as a lawyer, but also as a blind person, a decorated veteran. He attends today. I am mindful as a lawyer with a disability on the public square, the momentous sweep of history, and Cleo, who guides us in this regard, as well as our solemn obligation to both build better history and to build a better society for all. Let me conclude with the words of Brother President George Washington, who once stated, "To merit the approbation of good and virtuous men is the height of my ambition." Thanks so much for this honor, and I look forward to working with you to building a better Maryland.
This honoree is a former police officer who found his way into banking. He says working in law enforcement helped him learn how to deal with people from different backgrounds and serve them as both mentor and counselor. He has brought that practice to his banking career, where he has offered home buying and personal financial education to low-income communities. At his bank's branch in Cherry Hill, he has personally taught financial literacy classes to help students raise their credit scores. The BBJ is proud to honor Alfonso Pearson, Community Engagement Relationship Manager for JP Morgan Chase & Co.
Hello, I'm Alfonso Pearson, Mid-Atlantic Community Engagement Relationship Manager for JP Morgan Chase. And I am truly humbled and honored by being recognized as a recipient of the Baltimore Business Journal's Leader in Diversity Award. My career and purpose in life is built around service and improving the lives of the communities that we serve. My work in Baltimore is particularly important as it is focused on improving the financial health of the community. Financial inclusion breaks down barriers that African Americans and others have faced for generations in the areas of home ownership, small business development, and access to banking. My work and the work of my fellow recipients is just a beginning in the closing of the racial wealth gap that exists in our communities. I thank you again for this award.
This next honoree learned early on in her career about the need for social justice and the truth. She says she was born for the challenge of creating a more just world and is using her university classroom as well as ongoing academic research into critical race theory to play her part. It's all part of Kay Wise Whitehead's mission as an activist, academic, and humanitarian. Please help me recognize Professor Whitehead of Loyola University, Maryland.
My Nana once said, if there's something that you believe in, something that you're passionate about, then go forth and do the hard work. And other people will become passionate about it as well. Other people will believe in it as well. And that is why I do the work that I do. And that's why this award, being selected as a leader in diversity, matters so much to me. Thank you for nominating me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for selecting me. Thank you for supporting the work that I do every single day to bring awareness to these issues.
This award winner has helped to start a constant dialogue about inclusivity at one of the Baltimore area's most powerful poverty-fighting nonprofits. As the leader of the organization's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, she has created a monthly discussion series for the nonprofit's board and served as a coach for United Way's Community Impact Leadership Institute, which steers young people to become socially responsible leaders. Please join us in honoring Wayne Yoon, Director of Equity and Executive Office Operations for the United Way of Central Maryland.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so grateful and humbled to be before you today to accept this honor. I want to personally thank the Baltimore Business Journal for recognizing me and our fellow honorees. I want to shout out my organization personally, the United Way of Central Maryland, and that entire team of passionate employees who continue to work to make a difference for Central Maryland families. Special shout out to my president and CEO, Franklin Baker, who sets the tone, our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Executive Champion, our COO, Martina Martin, and our entire Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team, and the woman who made it all happen and who I owe a huge debt of gratitude for my current career trajectory, for taking a chance on me, Tanya Ferguson. So again, thank you this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful day.
On behalf of all of us at Kennedy Krieger Institute, congratulations to Maureen Vanstone and Dr. Harolyn Belcher for this wonderful award from the BBJ. During the healthcare crisis from COVID-19 and the economic hardships that followed, your championing equity, your leadership, your advocacy, and your wisdom on behalf of all of those in our community who are most vulnerable to the adverse outcomes, you've made a huge difference in their lives, and we could not have done what we've done without you. So thank you again for your outstanding leadership, and congratulations.
So to set the stage for our panel discussion, I want to first define diversity, equity, and inclusion using my favorite analogy, which is that of being invited to a dinner. It's a little simplistic, but I think it makes our point. And that analogy goes like this. Diversity ensures that everyone representing all communities is invited to the dinner. Equity is the planning the dinner. Everyone is assured the same access to the dinner, and all barriers to participating in the dinner have been removed by the dinner planners. And I want to thank Diane Bell McCoy for helping me with that. Inclusion, it means that everyone has the opportunity to eat. And then finally, I want to add to our discussion belonging, because belonging happens when dinner participants feel so welcome that they want to return to the table. So those are our definitions as we head into this discussion. And I want to bring in our panel of experts who are doing what they can to make this world a more diverse, equitable, inclusive place for all. And I will start by welcoming Nathaniel Alston, Nat, President and CEO of the Horizons Group and co-founder and chair of the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources. Welcome, Nat.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to participate.
Next, Diane Bell McCoy, President and CEO, Associated Black Charities. And definitely the person I lean on when I have a question in this area, for sure. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you very much. And if I can say congratulations to the honorees, and also thank you for your sponsors. Thank you for having me here today.
I'd like to welcome Vinroy July, partner at Dickinson Wright. Hi, Vinroy.
Rhonda, first, thank you guys for having me. Really looking forward to this discussion. Really excited to be in the room with Diane and Nat. So I think this is going to be a great discussion. And again, congratulations to the honorees.
And I also, Kathleen McNally Durkin, CEO of the ARC Baltimore. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the ARC, it is a nonprofit whose mission is supporting people with developmental disabilities to lead fulfilling lives. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Rhonda. And it's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations also to the honorees. But I also want to commend the BBJ for including disability perspective in this conversation. Sometimes disability perspective is left out. So I appreciate your leadership in this.
Well, welcome, panelists. And I have a lot that I want to touch on. I don't know if I'm going to get to it all. I have this plate with all this food on it, and we want to get through all of it. And so I'm just going to jump in with my first question, which is, I want to start with you, Nat. Studies have shown that the pandemic has had an outsized negative effect on women, Black and Brown employees. What steps should companies take to address this within their organizations?
That's a very good question that you asked, really. And what we've done for our national organization really is telling our clients and our members, really what we look at diversity and inclusion, not so much really as a policy, but as a philosophy. And when we say philosophy, what you were just talking about, everyone at the table eating and being a part of that. If you recognize, and we're saying, if you recognize now that this pandemic has really, what we've said, highlighted the inefficiencies and deficiencies in whatever business model you have and whatever, shall we say, industry that you have, and particularly as it relates to women in the field, then by having a diversity that is a philosophy, not a policy, then you are very much sensitive to the needs of people that have been severely affected by reading that. So really what we said to our clients out there and to our members, make a concerted effort. And when we look at it, when I say concerted effort, meaning going out there and doing the recruitment, the talent acquisition, and going beyond what you would call the traditional recruiting. And really, it's almost really in the same sense when we've had these discussions as rolling out the pandemic, the vaccine. You've got to go where the people are. And you've got to have people who are out there that are reaching that community that are sensitive to those needs. When Kathleen mentioned the idea of accessibility, we're saying people that are having, as they say, disabilities, because we as HR professionals, we are under that Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's all part of our umbrella. So the only way that you can go out there and address that is to have a single mom that probably is dealing with childcare issues that's in your particular organization. So she can bring that sensitivity to that company and go out there and really be the voice and be showing that the company has the commitment, and really not so much a policy, but have a philosophy that it makes very good business sense to do that. So wherever there's an area of need, and the pandemic, as I said earlier, has really illustrated those needs. So all of us are aware. And if you've got that company that has that philosophy at the top, then it shouldn't be a problem. But if it is, hey, that's where we've got to have people in the company to bring that to management, senior management, and have them commit to going out there to do it. Not just women, but also disability people, also our veterans. So I can run down the entire list that has been impacted by that pandemic. So these are just some of the things that we're saying and advising our members and our organizations, companies that represent our organization.
So Diane, I would also like to get your thoughts on how companies deal with the outsized negative impact that it's had on marginalized employees, the pandemic.
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. And first, I'm going to excuse and disavow the BBJ from any of my answers. So, be clear that this is Diane Bell McCoy's answers coming from Associated Black Charities. And I want to congratulate everybody, both the honorees, the sponsors, and everybody in the room, in terms of, I think everybody's on a different part of a journey around racial equity and inclusion in your company. And it is, in fact, a journey. And so that some of you may be more at the beginning versus the middle versus more mature along the way. And so as I talk about this, it is not to step on anyone's toe, it's to acknowledge that it is a journey and it takes time in terms of to bring about change that we all want. But I would begin in terms of this question to also acknowledge that actually, based upon the data that we had an analysis done of Baltimore population, 64% of Black Baltimoreans are in low-wage jobs in 4 sectors in Baltimore. So that's the facts, okay? So as even we lift all of that up, understand what does that mean in a pandemic in terms of who was impacted, in terms of those low-wage jobs, who went first in terms of that. So the question to, if you are an employer, and that's part of who you are in terms of your demographics for your employees, first question I would ask, and assuming you're at the beginning of your journey, then how are you beginning to look at your data? Are you beginning to look at who does that look like in your company? Why did it result in having largely women or people of color being impacted by the pandemic versus another population? Because that will tell you something in terms of looking at your data as well in terms of promotion inside of your company. Who gets promoted in terms of that? Looking at the data, both retention as well as in terms of evaluation, in terms of, we had a recent company we were working with that realized they were losing, not related to the pandemic, but losing a lot of their Black female employees. And they looked and they saw that those Black female employees were all being evaluated by white females across the board. And when they looked at a different set of evaluators, those Black persons were staying. So again, I'm going to challenge and say the answer to that question for a company is data. Look at what your data says inside of your company in terms of what does that look like, and then what have you been putting in place, and what does that culture look like? But I think that's a little further down the journey in terms of beginning to examine your culture and how that's aiding for the loss of those workers. but I would say it would be natural in a pandemic, as it is natural in a recession, that the first workers to go out the door are the lowest at the level. And then in this country, that's still Black and brown and women.
Thank you. So we know from the poll question, a lot of companies have D&I strategies that they are tweaking, made changes to mission statements. Vinor, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what do companies get wrong when they implement D&I programs?
So it's funny, I'm actually going to piggyback up something that Nat mentioned. It's about this idea of like making it a policy. I mean, quite frankly, the issue that I see is that there are a couple of issues, quite frankly, right? So one of the big issues that I think that a lot of companies deal with diversity the same way they deal with kind of their pro bono charitable initiatives. It's almost as if, you know, it's a thought. There's like the right thing to do, but they're doing it as kind of a bonus, and so it's not actually like integrated as a part of like their like the culture of that organization. It's something that you do and you feel good about, but then once economics issues start to come about, it's very easy to kind of just cut off the thing that you're just doing to feel good about, because you can always justify it as economics, right? And so I think that's kind of the first issue. I think, you know, relatedly, I don't think that companies do a very good job of kind of thinking through, getting past kind of the buzzwords of, you know, you always hear this conversation about, you know, the business case for diversity. Mm-hmm. And they say it, but what does that actually mean, right? I think it's always good to say, you can say it in a big room and everybody will applaud and it all sounds fantastic, but what does that actually mean on the ground level? Are you actually taking into account and thinking through like how your diverse employees actually impact and might have other thoughts and other perspectives that could actually help to increase your revenues and your business case? And it's not just something that, oh, they are here, we can send them in front of people that look like them and that's it. And we should be happy about that because now we have representation, right? And so far too often, from my perspective, and look, I should have probably given the disclaimer like Diane, this is Benro July speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of the BBJ or of Dickinson Wright, and I'm new to the firm, so certainly this has not been my experience here. But the reality is that far too many companies kind of just, they're not really that thoughtful about how diversity actually is integrated and is useful for their companies. And they do it as kind of a second afterthought, that they feel good about the fact that they have this many diverse people and they can put it in all their magazines. And they very quickly pigeonhole those people into doing the businesses that are only specific to those people, as opposed to using their diversity to actually create mechanisms and to think through different business avenues that are going to be beneficial to the company as a whole. And so whenever this starts to bump against economic issues, it's very easy to kind of eliminate the diversity part.
So to sort of piggyback on that, because it does become something where some companies check a box, how do you counteract the perception that the focus on D&I is overstated? So some of your employees will say, you know, we talk about it all the time, it's overstated, or executives might say, based on the value to the company, you know, I don't know that we need to put this much emphasis on it. Also, how do you get around this still very common perception that it promotes quotas? So I'd like to get all of you to speak just briefly on this. And Kathleen, I'd like to start with you. How do you counteract this perception that D&I is overstated based on value and it promotes quotas?
Sure, I think it really starts with the authenticity of the work that you're doing, and people can see through that, first of all. So, and I do think there's kind of a hazard of people just stopping at the quota, the representation, I have the right people in the room. But that's not equity and inclusion, right? That's just data, basically. So you have to be intentional. And we do a lot of work with employers. So it was, Rhonda explained, we work with people with disabilities, but we're also a very large employer. I have over 1,000 employees. So we talk to companies about the tangible benefits to their business. So things like, improved morale or higher performance, reduced turnover, fewer sick days, greater innovation, as we talked about, lots more engagement from the staff, and really an increased bottom line. And that's, I think, what Venro was saying. There's a business imperative to this. So different points of view, give your company an edge in the market. And today, being innovative, it's not just this nice thing you do, it's a fundamental thing. So for us, as I said, we're a really large employer and we have a very diverse workforce. So I don't think that you can put a price on how staff feel when they see themselves in policy and in the actions. But we also know from the diversity of an employee with a disability, employers tell us it has made a profound difference in their culture, and they're an untapped labor pool. But time after time, we hear from employers that they were so excited they hired somebody, they were doing it as thought it was the right thing to do, as Venroy kind of said, they thought it was just the right thing to do, but then they were amazed at the kind of impact that that person then had on their company. It was a good employee, but it was more important that it really changed the culture of their company. So people with disabilities affect the culture and the feel of a workplace. So you get a good employee, but more importantly, you get those tangible benefits. So again, the reduced turnover, reduced recruiting costs and the bottom line, but you have a positive impact on that workplace and the culture of that workplace.
Rhonda, if I can add to that a little bit too, on that, and I put it into context when I'm listening to the group here. I've been involved in this for almost over 35, almost 40 years. And when I share with my HR colleagues out there, we're talking about diversity. 30 years ago was affirmative action. And I'll stop right there almost. Companies jumped on this bandwagon of affirmative action, quotas, and everything else. And so once we start seeing, moving it forward and looking at 2020, particularly after George Floyd, everyone jumped in on the social justice movement. And you use the term, let's check the box. Let's check the box. And we saw in our national organization a flood of companies going out there hiring CDOs, Chief Diversity Officers. And those Chief Diversity Officers reported to higher management, senior management. And then we saw after that, Wall Street Journal issued an article, I think back in November 2020, where the CDOs experienced a 30% turnover because they weren't reporting directly to the board. It was strictly a box check. It looks good on paper. It looks good makes very good optics. But again, did they have, in our estimation, did they have the juice to make the difference in the culture change? And so we also got a lot of companies throughout the entire United States that called us and wanted to do just what you said, wanted to check the box and use us to, we're aligned with us. And the first thing that I've said to our chapters out there, take a look at their board of directors. Start at the top. And when you see diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality, inclusion, dignity, and respect at the C-suite level, the board of directors, then it becomes less of a quota, a data, but a philosophy, because the track record is out there. If you've got a diverse workforce and a diverse organization from the top down, it affects your bottom line. And your bottom line, it affects in a positive way. So yes, the data is there, but if you don't have, and I've seen companies use the data and say, okay, we've got to have this, we've got to have this percentage, but unless it starts at the top, and having reported to been a C-suite person myself, if you got that person there at that C-suite where it becomes a philosophy, a way of life, a culture that we're going to include everyone, that we're going to be equitable, then you start minimizing the data analysis out there, because people start flocking to your company because what? You become a great place to work. You have diversity and inclusion, and people see that. And I give one example out there that really is a forward-thinking company, and that's Procter & Gamble out of Cincinnati, Ohio. They look at diversity and inclusion as a philosophy and a way of life for their company. And so that's one of the top companies out there. So I'll close. When I look at it from that C-suite, and that C-suite board of directors, the C-suite officers have diversity and inclusion, and that becomes a philosophy, not a policy. Not saying I got to have one that's diverse, but a philosophy of the entire culture of the company, then that company thrives.
I would probably, if I can, Rhonda, and be a little bit succinct on that, is add to both Nate and Catherine's comment to say that there's a lot of research, and I can send you the articles in terms of that actually shows that diversity in terms of Nat's point of the last 25 years has really been a waste of money in terms of, and that's not a negative to anyone who's a DEI officer, but a waste in terms of what its original intent was, in terms of it really has been checked the box. It really has not changed a core culture that when you talk about a real DEI, as Nat talks about in terms of philosophy, I would say it even goes further than that. When you talk about a real DEI strategy, it is like any other business strategy. It is that, a strategy. You actually are starting with what goals you want to achieve. You're actually starting with what the data you're actually wanting to look. You're really using an organizational development model because that's the core of the company. And so I applaud all the companies here and other places that are doing something external in terms of both resources and others. But I would say to you, it's not enough. Sorry, guys, it's not enough. That unless you're looking inside of your own organization, what you do external is simply not enough. And there's a lot of data both now coming out of Brookings. There's a local firm called the Black Brain Trust, others that are beginning to look at how do we measure racial equity in terms of inside the business and coming up with metrics. That's going to be a game changer for us in terms of moving this kind of agenda forward, because it really is about, from an organizational development, looking at what your culture is in terms of how does that play out. Looking, because oftentimes, and beginning with, the journey has to begin with, from a racial issue of racial equity, you have to begin with understanding and seeing what you don't see. And unfortunately, even being Black, it doesn't give a guarantee that you know the history in terms of structural racism in this country. And I would say probably about 90% of America really doesn't know the history in terms of that. And until we stop, and that has to happen at the C-suite, is Nat's point, unless this begins with the CEO, unless the CEO, and I know a lot of white males in Baltimore that are my good friends in terms of that, but also understand they've got a lot of fear about confronting this conversation. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to, in terms of also their brand, but that's where it has to begin, to go through the learning journey first, corporation-wide, really spend time there. That might take a year. Right. That might take a year before you try to do anything else. It really is pretty predictable to get there, but you got to be willing, and you got to set the space that's going to build trust in order to go through this journey. This is not an easy journey in terms of going forward, but certainly if you stop at diversity, then I'm okay, because that's, you're saying a statement, that's all I'm willing to do, and that's all I'm willing to give. That's fine, but you got to know that the rest of the world knows that you are the emperor with no clothes on, in terms of they know that that really is not real. And so I would say that it really is growing in this country, a greater understanding of what this is to be very real, and it takes time to grow that, but it's something it's embedded in the policies and practices and culture inside of companies, including in terms of, as a Black nonprofit, I'm clear about my own white infiltration and how do I begin to decolonize myself around a whiteness frame that this country has laid out. So all of us have to be on this journey.
So Diane, thanks for that. I mean, and it's always hard to kind of follow up after you tried since I was an expert, and you did ask for all of us. So, just going back to the question, I wrote down, this idea about, that it's overused, the necessity for diversity is overused, and it's not a business imperative. And I really like to focus on kind of that business imperative part. Because I think, quite frankly, until businesses start to understand why this is important, this is all just lip service, right? I mean, it's fine. It's great that some people want to do it for the goodness of their heart, but at the end of the day, in my view, is that's going to come down to dollars, and right. And so when you hear people say that they don't think it's necessary, there's not a business imperative, quite frankly, I think that's extremely short-sighted. I mean, how long have companies been thinking about diversity in real ways? And it's not like it's a consistent emphasis and recognize and allowing for us to see the impact that it has, in the long run, right? I mean, we have fits and starts, and then there might be some economic disruption, and then diversity goes out the window. Like nobody cares about it, right? And I think it has to be a prolonged effort for you to really start to see and understand how all these things come into play that can ultimately end up thinking about your bottom line. From a corporate standpoint, corporations should be thinking about a longevity. A perspective should be one that is over years and not just immediate, right? It's you're thinking about how things are shifting and how that's going to impact your bottom line over the long run. And we have to just be very frank. I always remember, this conversation about diversity, like, let's be very clear. And we still haven't gotten to where we need to get to, but a lot of the focus of diversity has been where we've seen the most advancement has been with the advancement of women, of white women in particular within workplaces. Who would question whether or not getting white women to be more included in the workplace has actually now had a positive economic impact, right? I don't think very many people would question whether that's true or not, but I remember reading an article that they had found from Above the Law, which is a law firm based, a legal periodical, and it was a memo from in the 50s where some partners at law firms were basically saying that we need to just push women into, and clearly back then we were really predominantly talking about white women, pushing them into certain into certain practices because they're never going to really have an economic impact on this business. Well, now the firms that I've been at, women were 50% of the partners, right? And they're pushing economics, right? And so, but it takes time. You have to be deliberate, you have to be intentional, you have to be incentivized to take the time to allow for you to really kind of see the economic benefit over time. It might not be a year, it might not be two, but if you're so quick because you think, oh, this is just the right thing to do, which is what I think ultimately happens, particularly as you start talking about people who you don't interact with on a regular basis, right? Because that's one of the major factors, right? If I'm not interacting with Black and brown and disabled and other demographics, then it's very easy for me to kind of give up when things aren't going right initially. We have to think a much longer term strategy and how it's going to actually be beneficial for our bottom line and not be willing to give up after a year or two or three. So
that brings up, because several times we've heard it's not just a policy, right? It's not an initiative. It has to be a philosophy within your organization. So how do you bake diversity into the actual culture of your organization so that it is a philosophy? How does it move beyond being just a policy? Kathleen, can you chime in on this?
Sure. So I think you have to make it part of your everyday business practice. Can't be an add-on. It can't be the special project of the month. And I think that's, what, again, as Ben Roy kind of said, is that, it's just the hot topic right now, but that is not a long-term strategy. You have to make it part of all the normal things that you do. So, at the ARC, we have a DEI committee, and HR is part of it, but part of what they're working on is coming up with action steps that we're going to incorporate into our strategic plan. So kind of what Nat said is we're going to make it part of our strategic plan. So I have to report back to my board on it. And I have public reporting as a nonprofit in my strategic plan. So that DEI committee is going to work on things that can happen, and they can, come up with some measurables, because I am, like Diane, pretty data oriented. And I think data shows that you're making progress or not. We also have a leadership institute. So we talk a lot about leadership has to come from every seat. So I agree that the CEO has to be on board, and it has to come. We've worked really hard on getting more diversity at my senior management table and my board, and I'm pretty proud of that. But I also have to make sure that people in every seat. So we have a large direct support professional And that group needs to be comfortable in a space that they can say things. And so we have a leadership institute, and you know, folks that are direct support, director level, they're assigned a mentor. It's a year-long program. And it's really about, again, messaging and having a learning environment where we have shared language. And it's not shared, it's chaired by a clinician. So it's not chaired by HR. And then we have a retention committee, and again, not chaired by HR, it's really program staff. And that looks at and this has been for 10 years now, how are people feeling valued? And I can say that I think this program might, you know, help you feel valued, but that does not mean the person in the direct support position feels valued. So, so it's about, again, everybody across the agency is part of this group. And they come to me and they have a budget. So again, I think it's important to put money, especially as a nonprofit. You know, money is precious to making our mission and our margin as much. But I think if I don't put money towards it, it's not as, it just puts, you know, power behind it. So they're given a budget. And again, it's kind of baked into the things that we do anyway. We make sure it's part of the conversation and part of what I put resources and board backing to.
And I would add to that too, Rhonda, when I hear the answers and the questions that are given and the awardees, and again, congratulations to all. Our focus and my consultant's focus is on that private sector. And when I look at that private sector, I'm looking at, and I'm going to take a little bit of Diane's, what we call privilege out there a little bit. I'll step on some toes because I can. I look at that private sector and look at the BGEs, the McCormicks, the Under Armours. I look at their boards. And when you talk about a philosophy and all, hey, right now it's policy and bottom line driven, because they were going to say, I want to get a return to my shareholders and all. That's where I see the biggest impact being made. When you got diversity and inclusion at the top, those companies and others that I've listed, if they're diverse and have a philosophy, and I guess really having been in this area all my life and probably looking at one of the key innovators back in years back, James Rouse, when he formed Columbia. When he formed Columbia, he didn't just take diversity and inclusion and affirmative action. He took also economic diversity. He also took religious diversity. All that was included in the planning of Columbia and how it was planned and implemented. And so when I look at him and saying he is the CEO and owner of the company, and that culture he permeated all the way down, that starts with Kevin Plank when he started Under Armour. That started with anyone that wants to look at diversity and inclusion, and not just in terms of ethnicity, but looking at it with a broad umbrella, LGBTQ community. Let's look at the broad umbrella, religious community. So everyone, as you said, has a seat at the table. They're eating at the table, and they're making decisions as to what type of food they're going to eat at the table. But that's a culture and a philosophy that starts to me at the top. So that's what I said earlier. When I look at private sector companies, I know the nonprofit and you ladies are doing fantastic jobs because that's your mission and there's a philosophy and guidance there. But that private sector that I look at all the time, I want to see that philosophy there, starting from the board of directors, going down to that C-suite. So when Diane and Kathleen, you approach them, guess what? They're going to include you, and Kennedy Krieger, they're going to include you in their what? Philanthropic, because it's part of that culture.
So Nat, let me just add though, I am a nonprofit, but my relationships of where we seek to impact is in the private sector. So let me just be clear about who we are in terms of that. So my clients, in terms of, because we can't change the wealth trajectory for Black Baltimoreans unless we're talking to the private sector. So that is
Absolutely.
a part of what we and who we work with as we work with the workforce ecosystem. Employers are very much a part of that. We actually do training for private sector employers. And so they're very much a part of the strategy for us of getting private sector employees to start this journey and to be clear about what this journey is and how do they move forward. But again, I think Benroy's point, Catherine's point, your point is it is in fact a journey. And even taking BG&E, for example, in terms of I love Calvin Butler and what he was able to do there, but I will tell you now, even now, they're going deeper even on their racial equity journey in terms of both inside and outside. We're actually going to do something with them and help. So they really get clear about how to continue to grow this, because it does make a difference in terms of the culture for the organization and what Calvin was able to do in terms of also for Black and Brown businesses. It really is, and the board, it really is very much moving it as a journey. And they're clear it's a journey. It's not going to just stop when Calvin left. It's going to continue to even get better in terms of BG&E. Accenture is another one, another private sector employer that has a very strong racial equity in terms of in their corporate framework, in their culture. And so I think it's also important to look for those examples and ask them questions about their journey, because they will tell you they're not there yet. They very much are a part of moving forward in terms of this change. And for us, employers have to be a part of this change process, given the fact that I just told you 64% of African Americans in Baltimore in low-wage jobs in 4 sectors. Okay, and so that's real clear. I'm real business-minded, real focused on private sector in terms of moving this agenda.
Well, I want to, and we're pretty much out of time. This is. I mean, we could go another hour, right? But I do want to ask one final question, because I do think we have to appreciate that diversity. It's an investment. D&I is an investment. Yeah. And that's why, I think sometimes companies, you start to, oh, well, can we move the budget? Because they don't understand. I mean, there's a cost and they don't always understand the value. We talked about that a little bit, but some things are easier to evaluate than others. So when you look at diversity, it's fairly straightforward, right? You can easily evaluate what you look like from a diversity perspective. How do you suggest companies evaluate the equity and inclusion portion of this? So I'm the DEI officer. I'm making my case to the CEO. Diane, I'll start with you. How do you help plead your case in terms of how you evaluate progress?
Again, I'm going to go back to the point around goals. What is the CEO goals? Where are you trying to accomplish with this? You may not get this data and this information in the first year, but you ought to be looking at your own data. Hopefully, then the next year we'll actually have real metrics from lots of that effort being done in the private sector right now, trying to develop metrics for different sectors. But you've got metrics already in terms of all companies are looking at their retention. All companies are looking at what that looks like in terms of bringing people in, who stays in, who gets promoted. All companies are looking at that in terms of their leadership and what that looks like, how that changed over time. At one company that realized when they looked at their data in their finance sectors, a major company, over 40 years of this company, they never, ever had a person of color in the finance sector. They went, oh my God. So you really do have information that's readily available, but you've got to be willing to look at it, or you've got to begin to capture it. You can begin to do that now, but you've got to be willing to have that conversation and getting input, getting the voices of your workers, getting the voices of your leadership, Black and Brown, disabled, getting those voices to the table, and in such a way that can allow them and protect them. So you want to create trust in terms of those voices, those stories, are as much a data point as actual hard data.
And I would add to that, Rhonda, too.
Hold on a minute. Let me hear from Benroy and then Nat again.
Okay, sure.
No, so I think one of the very easy data points that it actually piggybacks off of how we started this conversation, and one of the questions that was supposed to be here, right? It's, are your diverse people staying? Right? Like, let's be very clear. Like, we talk about all these things about being at the dinner table. A part of it is, do I want to come back to the dinner table? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you from my experience, diverse people, because we recognize that it's not sweet out there otherwise, that if you are in an organization that values you, gives you opportunities for advancement, recognizes your skills, the biggest question, it's fine to talk about, oh, I'm going to attract and try to recruit diversity. I always say, particularly at law firms have never, ever had an issue getting young, Black, or diverse talent. It's never been an issue. The issue is, how do you see those people doing at year 5 on? Are they still there? Are they still a part of the culture? Do they feel like they are a part of the team? Do they feel like they are actually being supported? So if we want to talk about what is the data points, the data point is looking at where they started and what you have done to get them and see if they're still there. And the reality is that some people are just going to leave. That's an attrition point. But and a very also relevant point is, where are they going to, right? Are they going to other organizations similar to you? Are they going to a different industry? You know, those are all data points that are important. But if we're really talking about this diversity push, it goes to the point of, it has to be sustained effort. It has to allow people to feel like they're supported. They have to feel like they're part of the culture. And if you want to see how you're doing with equity and inclusion, the best data point is, how are the diverse people that you brought in, are they staying with you or not?
Are they going up? Are they being promoted upward?
Right. Exactly.
Are they advancing? And I would say that, am I allowed to jump in? Sorry. Yeah. So I would say, you know, part of it for us is really, people stay if they feel like they belong, right? So, you know, you kind of talked about at the beginning about the analogy of the dinner table, but, you know, the sense of, I belong as part of this business, and I'm, you know, engaged in the purpose of the business. And so just because the company feels like they've included somebody does not mean it's not the same as that person saying, I feel like I belong. And that's about conversations. And we do a lot of touch points with staff to make sure, you know, after their 90 days, I meet with them as well as HR, and I say, are we doing what you thought we said we would do in your orientation? Are we who we thought, you know, we marketed to you? And we look at retention data, and why are people leaving? Why are people staying? What's hooking you to stay here? You know, and I think that belonging piece is something that strategies can, you know, enforce and enhance, but only if you really look at talking to the folks that are here and, you know, making sure they're at the table, but adjusting your, you know, what you're doing around making sure they feel like they're part of the purpose of your workforce. So I think that.
And Matt, if you can take us home, because I do want to get one question from our audience.
Sure. Well, very quickly, you mentioned an investment, and what we've got to also think about, particularly companies that are publicly traded and all, they're thinking short term. When you talk about these strategies out there, they're thinking short term. And as Diane mentioned, this is a journey. And we've got to get in that philosophy of, one, not thinking ROI next quarter, next month, next year. Not that return on investment is going to be a long-term strategy, not a short-term strategy. And that's what we really have to look at out there. And again, where that person is, how much influence that CDO has, and creating that culture and sharing from that C-suite, having that person at that C-suite level understand that this is a long-term strategy and that the ROI is not going to be next year, it's going to be probably years out. Because when you talk about development, that's not one day, that's not 1 year, that's long-term.
Thank you. Thank you for a really great discussion. I do want to get, we have a couple of questions, and I want to be able to get to at least one of these. And I hope you all will indulge us. We want to wrap up, I know, at 5 o'clock, but we might, if you can indulge us for 10 more minutes after that, this will be great. So Andrea Grant asked, can you speak to the importance and effectiveness of coaching, mentorship, and sponsorship with regard to diversity, inclusion, race, equity, and belonging? And I'm going to start with you, Vinroy. Do you have some thoughts on how that works? Because I know at law firms, there's a lot of coaching and development that goes on.
This is just a loaded question. So I think we have to make sure that we are distinguished what those different roles are, right? Mentor is someone that, you could talk to about just everything about your social life, how you work within law firm or in organizations generally. Sponsorship is someone who's actually going to be able to impact your career, give you the opportunities, and help to navigate you through the waters within your organization. And I will just say that most of my sponsors, quite frankly, because the law firms have not been other diverse people. There have been white allies who have recognized the necessity to have diversity and think of it in a long-term path. And so I don't know that I get where I am today, or that anybody gets to where they are without having sponsors, because the difference is that in other communities where the non-diverse communities, the sponsorship and mentorship go hand in hand, because it's people they look like them, they feel welcome, they are a part of their communities when they leave work, and so they have an incentive to help them advance within their careers. And so for diverse people, it has to be an intentionality that goes with sponsorship. And I just don't see how, I think you need both, but if we're talking about the economic case, it's those people who are going to be able to put you in rooms where you're going to now be able to see the issues and be able to look at it from a diversity lens and think, okay, how can we improve upon this in ways that are going to be financially beneficial to our company? And unless you have that, I don't think there's any potential chance of really advancing with these organizations.
Yeah, I agree. If you have not been paying attention to this chat, please do. Diane has posted some interesting information. There's some other good questions and information being posted. I want to acknowledge what Gary Norman posted, which is that he points out the need to include more leaders with disabilities on high-level boards in the business community. So thank you, Gary, for your comments. But again, lots of great comments coming in from our attendees. Unfortunately, we could again talk about this for quite a while longer. Now I will turn it over to Tricia.
Thank you, Rhonda. And wow, this is a true definition of real talk. So congratulations again to all honorees. These conversations that we're having, conversations that in the past were considered taboo, in us advancing equity throughout our society. We need to grow and learn from each other because we're in this together. And here's why. Think about it. This is the first time in our world, in our society, that we've had to deal with so much uncertainty and the unknown. So here's the question. How are you feeling about COVID-19, the political unrest, and racial and social injustice? Do you feel we are progressing and moving forward? Why or why not?
So now that we have everyone back in the room, I just want to like sort of open it up a little bit to hear some of your thoughts. If somebody wants to talk about something that they heard on the panel that they want to address, or if they had something come up in their breakout room conversation that they want to share. We have maybe 2 or 3 minutes if anybody wants to share something that they discussed or learned. Yes.
Rhonda, my question is, what might be the media's role in this agenda to move this kind of agenda forward? In addition to this kind of activity, what should the media has a very powerful ability to influence this country. What should the media's role in reporting just the facts?
Well, that's a good question. So I think I'm going to invite Joanna on this conversation, because I will tell you, when we talk about the media, the published role and the editor's role is very different. So I get to have a little bit more of an opinion on this. But Joanna, what are your thoughts?
I guess our thoughts are, like every other company, we had to look at, what we were doing, to make sure we're more inclusive. And, for years, the Baltimore Business Journal, I've been here a long time. We were known for having like the white guy in a tie standing in front of a building. And over, the last, couple decades, we've been trying to diversify. And I think we're a lot more intentional now, making sure we are finding companies that, are run by Black and brown people, by women. And we are making it part of our discussion every day, pretty much. And, you have to do that if you're going to, make your newspaper and your online site look like your community.
So I will just add to that. I don't think that our role is to advocate for policies, but we certainly have a role in identifying problems and talking with business leaders about what those solutions should look like. So some of you might have been familiar with the Color of Money series that we did, where we actually pointed out the lack of representation in the boardrooms for people of color. We recently did a story on the procurement and how difficult it is for minority companies to take advantage of government contracts. So I think we're just trying to be really intentional, especially with regard to discussion on equity, because it is such a large part of the systemic issues in Baltimore. So that's the role we play, to uncover, inform, and certainly reach out to the business community about solutions.
So can I offer though, I said this to Holden already, he knows I'm gonna say this, in terms of that though, as you do that, that just as the BBJ is known for across the country in terms of your wonderful list, in terms of every year updating your stories and telling us where those businesses are now. In terms of that would be such an eye-opening for all those that leaped out there at the death of George Floyd, who said, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Let's look at where they are and what have they done. That would be very interesting to do that every year and kind of do a kind of a grade of where they are moving. Just the facts, that's all, just the facts.
Diane, you hit it on there. When we used to do EEO, they say people don't do what's expected. People only do when inspected.
Oh, very good. Well, we like that. Thank you all for your time. We're a little bit over, so I appreciate everybody indulging us for a few extra minutes. But we will end on that note because I think Nat made an excellent point. I want to again thank the Truist DEI team and all of you who've attended to participate in this discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys were amazing. I enjoyed the conversation. And I want to congratulate our honorees once again.